Lowe's knows how to help you get the most out of your store run. That's why members save more with My Lowe's Rewards. Earn points towards My Lowe's money on eligible purchases. Get access to member-only deals and free member gifts. Plus, unlock free standard shipping when you reach Silver Key status. So what are you waiting for? Join for free today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
Today on CityCast Denver. Now that the Republicans in Congress have agreed not to arrest him on site, Mayor Mike Johnston will be traveling to D.C. next week for a high-stakes hearing on his approach to immigration. So as the mayor returns for his regular sit-down with me and producer Paul Karolyi, we're talking about his trip to Washington, but also his stance on a few recent hot-button debates. Plus, he's got some wins to share and a sneak peek at big things to come. Today is Wednesday, February 26th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Mayor Mike Johnston, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be back.
So producer Paul Karolyi is also here as well.
Also here.
Mayor, I typically see you out and about at concerts and Nuggets games and stuff, but so we were maybe scrolling your Instagram to see what you've been up to, and I haven't seen you do anything super fun. What's going on? So what's up with your social calendar?
I'm trying to be a little more fun.
Do you need to call your kids and ask them?
That's right. I mean, I am sort of chasing around my kids. We did move houses in the last month.
Oh, congratulations.
We only moved about 4 blocks.
That's a big
we didn't
deal.
make it very far. But it turns out packing up everything
I was just going to say, to move 4 blocks,
and moving it all
did that.
4 blocks.
It feels sort of counterproductive, but you weren't going to walk it over there.
You can't really just make your kids carry the couch 4 blocks, but you feel like you should.
Yeah.
So that took up a fair amount of time. But no, I think we are doing some fun stuff. We've just started college tours for my kids, which is crazy. So a little bit of travel there.
Wow.
But yeah, I still get to do a lot of fun stuff. I had a great dinner out on Broadway Saturday night, and so
where'd you go?
Give us a spot.
We went to La Follette, which is new, but the line was too long. It was 2.5 hour wait.
Oh.
So that looks like a great, exciting new place in South Broadway. So went out across the road to Postino and had dinner there, which is great.
Honestly, that's becoming a standby.
Modern classic.
Yeah.
It was. It was
agree.
good. They have a new Toastini, which is like an espresso martini, but with toasted marshmallows. Yeah.
Espresso martini.
I
so
was
hot
not
right
a
now.
believer, and it was totally great.
It was good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I promise this, we're not going to talk about social media the whole time.
I know.
But I do want to ask you about X, because City Council just got off X, and I looked at your account. You haven't posted in a couple of weeks. Are you done with X?
I'm trying to make that decision. I've not been using it recently. Obviously, there's a lot about it I find very concerning, both in terms of the ideology of it and the use of the platform. And so we want to make sure we can get residents information that they need in all those places. And so haven't made a long-term decision, but right now we're prioritizing using other platforms.
Yeah,
Makes
it's a hard
sense.
balance.
Yeah.
Because it's like a public information space, but also there's a lot of weird stuff going on there.
It has become particularly destructive, I feel like, but we do want to make sure people get information wherever it's easiest for them. And so we have an obligation to do both. But so sorting that out right now.
It's hard because there are people still there for sure. And you want people to know, but anyway.
Well, so it kind of seems like you've had a rough couple of months. So we're thinking about the stabbings downtown, the November rejection from voters of the affordable housing tax. I'm wondering, what are you taking from these setbacks in how you're sort of approaching this whole leadership of the city?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there have been some great successes in the last few months, certainly challenges, but obviously being the city selected for the expansion of the women's soccer franchise, big win for us. Solidifying, acquiring the largest new park in 120 years with the Park Hill Golf Course, great win for us. The passage of the Downtown Denver Authority in the ballot, which was not fairly unnoticed, but it's $570 million to invest in downtown without raising taxes. Those were all historic successes. So we all try to view it as a balance. Like when you have 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 big things going at once, you're not going to win on all of them all the time. But in affordable housing, we knew this is what makes it so challenging. Is everyone in Denver is worried about it, and people are also very ambivalent about it because they say, yes, I want a place that's affordable, And I'm not sure I want more affordable housing, air quotes, in my neighborhood. What does that mean? What does that look like? And so I think what we found is we have to do a better job explaining to people what we talk about when we talk about housing that is affordable to working families. These are not the public housing projects you might have assumed from the 1980s or 90s. It's really places that teachers and nurses can afford to live. And so I think we have to do a better job in communicating about that. And we've learned some lessons on that I'm happy to share.
So you feel like it was more about what the money was going to go to, was maybe a little bit not so super tightly explained?
I think we were clear on that. I think in a short 30-second ad, the notion of what does affordable housing for a middle-class person in Denver look like? They're never used to a teacher in the city getting access to subsidized housing. So how would that work? Does she live in a public housing project? Is she in a Section 8 apartment? No, what we were describing was it's the exact same apartment someone lives in now, but you have 100 units and 70 of them are market rate, but we put in some city money so that 30 of those units look exactly the same, have the same finishing as the $2,500 a unit, a month unit. But these are $1,400 a month because we put in money up front to construction to make those permanently more affordable. So I think people had a hard time envisioning what it could look like. And so they think they just defaulted to assuming, oh, this was about homelessness or this is about people that are not me. People, and the real focus is it is on that 50% of people that are struggling to pay the rent. And so I think we have to do a better job building examples of that kind of housing for folks to see and talking about this as not just for the highest need individuals, but really for regular working families across the city. So I think learned a lot from that. I always try to learn from the mistakes. And I think we are learning from that. On downtown, I think it is different. The stabbings in downtown were tragic and totally heartbreaking for the two families who lost loved ones, heartbreaking for the neighbors and the residents who felt really unsafe about it. And we're really focused on how we do better on public safety. And it's really important that folks not overextend that one fact pattern to what is a broader story of downtown. I mean, the reality is crime was down 25% in downtown from 23 to 2024. Drug crime down 55%. Like, we are moving the needle in the right direction in downtown. And still, we only have 3 or 4 blocks of 16th Street Mall open, but in those 3 or 4 blocks, revenues are up 30, 40% at those restaurants and retail stores. We've had 3 times more requests for leasing of buildings in the last 3 months than we have in the last 3 years combined. So it is coming back. So on that one, it's really important that folks know we have a plan, we're on it, it's going to open by this summer, and that'll be a big deal, and it doesn't take anything away from the tragedy anytime we lose somebody.
Something else related to downtown, but also like the affordability issue is this topic that I've been really obsessed with around restaurants lately.
Yes.
There's this proposal at the State House that a lot of restaurants have pushed to lower the tipped minimum wage. So the people who are working for tips don't have to get paid as much by their employers, the restaurateurs, who say they're in crisis, who say they're closing because labor costs have gone up so high. Kind of controversial, especially last weekend. We've seen really a lot of people come out against this. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, this is a really important topic, and it's complicated. And this is one where you can hold values on both sides, right? Like, both, we want restaurants to be successful in the city. We know it's a challenge. We've had 400 restaurants close in Denver over the last 3 or 4 years. And we know that a big part of that is the increase in the minimum wage. And we want folks to make more money. That's great. But it's meant, as you probably saw in the articles on this, that restaurant labor costs have gone up, about 200% over the last 8 to 10 years. That's a real challenge. And also what we see as a challenge is just the equity impact on folks in the restaurant industry. So I talked to a restaurateur last week who said, it's great. My servers are making about $120,000 a year because they have both the minimum wage plus their tips. My manager is making $80,000, and my back of restaurant staff are making $40,000. And so there are huge disparities across the restaurant industry, and that makes it very hard to keep managers or sometimes to keep back of house staff. And so they're looking at creative ways to say, how can we make sure everybody gets a livable wage? And we want to make sure everybody gets paid as much as they can, and that these restaurants still survive. And so one option was to reduce the tip minimum wage because, again, these folks will still have tips where sometimes back of house doesn't. There are other potential solutions we looked at the city level that don't require legislation that are, how do you pool some of those resources? So the idea of having restaurants go to, one idea we've been floating to restaurants is the idea of a service charge, which is
Sure.
if you do a service charge of 20%, you can gather that and you can spread it equally across all the employees. And And for us, what's interesting, we've been floating with restaurants is with a service charge.
Are they going for that?
Yeah, I'm curious because I have to say, as a server, that doesn't sound appealing to me.
I understand, and you can understand, right? If you're a server making $120K and you're back of a house,
I want to meet this server. I'm so curious.
Maybe it's 100. I'm just telling you what restaurants have shared to me. Then you certainly wouldn't want to give that up. But the challenge is if you have someone else making 40 on the staff, you also have a huge disparity to it. So the question is, how would they want to do it? Do you want to allocate it across? But what's interesting for us as the city, as we could say, you could pool those service charges. You could share it with all the staff. And interestingly for us, if you add a service charge, that comes above the line in the bill, which means it's also taxed.
Right.
So if you had a $100 tab and now you put a 20% service charge, you pay $120 and we tax $120.
Yeah, which is another reason why I think some people don't like it is because it gets double taxed.
Well, but
taxed when it comes in and then taxed when you pay the workers.
So our proposal would be if we did that, you could take the marginal new tax and we could share that revenue back with the restaurants as a way to say, do we help you cover some of your costs so the state doesn't need to get richer? We'll take some small additional revenue, but we could actually support the institution of the restaurant at the same time you're supporting dollars back to the individuals. So, I've been supportive of a version of solutions to this problem. I think the legislation is one way to do it. There are other possible options, but we want both things. We want folks to make as much money as they can, and we don't want to put more and more restaurants out of business. But I think the thing for us to wrestle with as people who are progressives is if we do nothing, you should not be surprised to keep seeing restaurant closures around the city going forward. Because when you talk about, I've talked to restaurateurs who said, my cost of labor in New York City is half what it is in Denver.
Yeah.
In New Orleans, it's a third what it is in Denver.
New Orleans makes me think we're thinking of the same restaurateur, Juan Padra of Culinary Creative Group. He was on our show a couple weeks ago.
Was he great? You've heard this story.
I have heard him talk about this at length. One last question on this before we move on. I feel like there's so much spin happening around this bill. I mean, because there are Democrats who are in favor of lowering the tip minimum wage. That's not something you hear Democrats talk about a lot. And I think it's because this narrative around the restaurant crisis is so strong. And I wonder, what is your vision for a healthy restaurant market? Because the way I see it is sometimes restaurants close, and that makes space for other restaurants to come in and succeed. This is a healthy churn at some point.
There is certainly a natural give and take in the ecosystem like all industries. I think what we're seeing is far outside of that normal transition of folks opening and closing. And I think when you look at all industries are handling cost increases differently. But when you're talking about 200% increase in cost, that is dramatic for an organization to manage. And the option is just to pass it on to consumers. And there's a point at which you're not going to pay $20 for a burger. And so then you don't go out at all. And we have seen that too. And I think you take that in combination with response from COVID, in combination with things downtown like the construction on 16th Street. And you have folks say, you know what, we'll just stay in tonight or we'll order in. All of which don't help wait staff or in-person staff. And so I think there's a balance, and I think we can do both. I just think it takes folks working together to say, we do want to support these industries, we do want to support these workers, and what's the best way to do both?
I think we have to talk about Colfax.
Sure.
Paul and I were down on Colfax last week. We were at Champagne Tiger, and we saw the BRT construction for ourselves.
Yes.
Business owners I definitely can see why this is such a struggle. And we know that there's a $2 million grant program to help some of these businesses, but there's also a big concern from those same businesses that isn't enough, that it's like barely a drop in the bucket for what they're dealing with. How are you viewing Colfax in the next 5 years? What does it look like to you?
I'm worried about this impact, as I know all of us are. And this is the complex part of this. We know infrastructure projects are important. We want more people to use public transit. We want bus rapid transit to be successful. The prospect of having a regular center running bus that came every 4 minutes down Colfax and you could get quickly and reliably to wherever you wanted to go, that would be great. And we want to get there. And it takes time to build it to get there. And so I think we're really focused on what are the things we can do, all of us, not just the city, to support these restaurants and these establishments in the interim. I actually got permission for the grand new announcement today on CityCast, which is I've been thinking about what I can do. One of the things I want to do is I'm going to launch a guest bartending program on Colfax. So anyone that will have me, I'm going to come in once a month, do events at restaurants or bars on Colfax, and just encourage all of our neighbors to come. Right? It's going to be easy to say, oh gosh, construction on Colfax, let's go to 17th, or let's go downtown, or let's go to Wash Park. We want to have it be the opposite, which is actually, this is a time where we should all do our part to go to Colfax. And so while it's under construction, people try to do this in downtown during the construction. We really got to do that on Colfax over the next year and a half. And so I'm going to do that personally with my family and friends. We'd ask people to do the same. We want the infrastructure to come, but we got to support business in the meantime. That means all of us showing up, and it also means us using the biofund dollars to make sure we can support them as we can.
So you're guest bartending?
I'm going to be guest bartending any place that will have me.
What's your drink? What's your specialty?
What do you know how to make?
I was going to say the things that I drink and the things that I can make are a different list. I'm great at beer and wine, it turns out, as a bartender.
Me too.
Margaritas. I'm good at margaritas. I'm good at old fashions and Manhattans because I make them for myself. So I feel like those are probably my 3 best drinks at this stage. But I learn fast.
Okay, we'll see. I'll remember that when the bill comes with that service fee or the tip or whatever.
Yes, you can keep me well below the tipped.
So the Colfax BRT thing, is there a breaking point where you're like, this is a disaster, we need to do more? Like when if the Squire, God forbid,
or the Lions Lair closed. Something really seminal
Pete's
to the
Kitchen.
Personality of the street.
And the breaking point in your mind is, would we stop the bus rapid transit construction?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't have even thought that was a possibility, but if you're suggesting it.
No, these are mostly federal funds. And so there was about $250 million of federal resources put into this project. As you know, it's been underway for almost 15 years. It was already moving when I became mayor. And so there's been a lot of effort to get us here. I think what we're trying to do is help make sure we can support all these businesses to survive in the process. And to your point, yes, is it true that business occasionally close and that's a regular cycle? Well, yes, but we really don't want to see these long-term Denver businesses get lost. So I think we're going to do everything we can in terms of driving traffic, expediting construction, providing relief where we can. But it does mean we have to have these conversations really carefully as we prepare for things like BRT on Federal or BLT on Colorado or other locations to make sure, is the infrastructure investment people want worth the disruption we'll have? And we think it's the right long-term investment, but there's no doubt it is a challenge during the construction period. Yeah. I think that what we can do going forward is, this was chosen to be a center-running bus rapid transit. So it takes much more construction to build these center running lanes and the islands where folks will board the buses. I think in other bus rapid transit infrastructure, we would probably do side running, which means you don't have to do much more construction in the center of the road. It can be a little more streamlined, less expensive, less timely.
I wonder what the transit lovers would think about that. I know the different types of BRT really drastically affects the
They do. The reason why folks have pushed for center running is center running means the bus can go nonstop without having to deal with other traffic pulling in and out of the turn lanes.
Turn lanes, yeah.
If you're on the right side and someone's in a turn lane, a bus can get slowed down. The real dream of bus rapid transit is we get signal timing right, so the bus triggers the signals to move when the bus arrives. We get fast loading, and that helps make your trip much quicker than just a regular bus ride might have. So you give up something in terms of speed there, but again, you have left turn lane issues also out of some turn lanes, so you can't entirely avoid it. But we think there are ways to do it cheaper and faster that could be side running, and that's what most of the proposals on federal and others will look like.
Speaking of this burden from infrastructure projects, I was having this same conversation with friend of the show, Frank Locantorio, the Colfax bid. I should also disclose, occasional sponsor of the program.
Love Frank.
Me too. Frank's the best.
Great guy.
But really we were talking about this, the burden of these infrastructure projects and how it always gives NIMBYs ammunition to oppose the projects. Oh, the construction's going to be so bad, it's going to kill these businesses. And his idea was, and I wonder what you think about this, if the city could have some kind of permanent fund where there's some block of money that is always there to support businesses impacted by these big construction projects like we've seen in the last few years, like I-70, like Colfax BRT, instead of every year trying to scrounge up $2 million here or there. What do you think about that?
We've looked at this. It's interesting. Denver is one of the only cities in the country that does this at all, that has a fund to ever support businesses that are impacted. Because you can imagine every construction project you do in the city of New York, if you subsidize the businesses on that block, you would spend the entire general fund there.
Yeah. And those businesses survive under scaffolding for years. I worked in one of those businesses.
They are used to that. So we've tried to find a balance where, and that also would take money away we could use to help support incubating new businesses or help scaling businesses that are long running. So it's a bit of a robbing Peter to pay Paul. But we do think in some of these places that are high profile and high impact, like 16th Street, like Colfax, there is real impact we want to help on. The other challenge is the amount of money it would take. Even if you're up to eligible for about $15,000 per business, for some restaurants, that's not a month worth of losses. And if you have if we 10 or 20x that still, we might not be able to buy out 2 years of impact. And so I think what we're trying to do is how to drive more traffic, get more of the residents engaged in providing their support. Like I saw some of the Lions Lair stuff online. They've done a great job kind of promoting and getting people to come.
Well, Walgreens opened their parking lot to Lions Lair, which I thought was awesome.
Was great. And that's the kind of collaborative community problem solving we love. And so we're going to do as much of that as we can. I see you got Voodoo here on the table. So you're obviously, maybe that was from the Broadway location, not the Colfax one. But
we're not going to tell you where that came from, but we did bring those donuts and then we didn't even offer you
Getting into the Colfax location is important. So I think what we want to try to do is combine direct city support with public support with accelerating construction.
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by CAP Management. CAP Management is a Denver-based HOA management company serving townhomes, mid-rises, and high-rises. From staffing, accounting, project management, careful reserve planning, customer service, and more, CAP serves properties that appreciate working with an engaged, proactive team with the expertise to work with the most complex properties. Many of their clients make up the skyline of our wonderful city. CAP is also the only HOA management company with a sustainability mission, dedicated to guiding HOAs and how to operate in a sustainable way, navigating ordinances like Energize Denver and Colorado's Building Performance Program. I'm just thinking about when my mom took over her HOA and got them to install those car chargers. Looking for Brooke to manage your property? Well, she's available. I'm just kidding. CAP is working to envision the future of the HOA industry, like their partnership with the University of Colorado to pilot the nation's first sustainable HOA certification framework. If your HOA is looking for help, visit capmanagement.com to learn more. That's capmanagement.com.
Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
We're going to stay on the topic of Colfax, but this is more about the open streets conversation. So Cerebro Brewing just had to downsize their popular patio to make room for a few parking spots to comply with zoning rules, which the business owner vocally said he didn't even want. And then there was the block of 29th and Larimer, which is back open to cars after being pedestrian only for several years. Viva Streets has been canceled. We know that you say you want to see more walkable, bikeable streets and spaces, but I have to say the messaging is not coming through, at least to me as a citizen, that that's a priority for the city.
Appreciate that. I think this is a great example where you see the same dilemma, right? Which is many people loved the walkable nature of 29th and Larimer. And the businesses were pushing us incredibly hard to reopen to traffic because their throughput of visitors is people that come up and park and come in and buy something. And so this is where we want to do both. We want to have it great. And I think that the people that are advocates for biking and walking will say, if you're biking by, you're more likely to stop and go in and patronize a place. That's true. But the distance one has to travel to get there means you can really target people within a square mile. But if you're someone that drives home every night and stops at Voodoo on the way or stops at Marzik on the way, but you live in Central Park and you drive from downtown, you're not likely to make that journey by bike. And so I think what we're trying to do is find that balance of how to make sure that businesses are still thriving and people can get there in a way that helps them patronize the institutions, and that we can do as much as we can that's bike and pedestrian friendly.
But there's winners and losers. You make a change, there's going to be a winner. There's going to be someone whose business better suits the walkable block, and someone there's always going to be that. I'm thinking that I know in this case in particular, there was a very vocal minority you alluded to. It was not a majority of the business and property owners in the neighborhood, but they somehow persuaded the day. So when do you say no to these loudest voices?
Well, maybe this goes to a longer-term transit conversation I'll share with you. My theory is what we want to do is get from, in most cities in the country in this space, if you're not New York or DC, you're not in a place where you can sustain a subway system that gets you anywhere, everywhere, all the time, and you cannot have a car anymore. If you're in a city like Denver and you have 3 kids and you have 2 working parents and you have kids that go to 2 or 3 different schools, you have a set of transit requirements that are not conducive to you saying, I ride the light rail to and from work, school, play, soccer practice, piano practice. And so to get us from here to there, I think what we have to do is focus on developing nodes or neighborhoods that are walkable and bikeable, that are built around the city. And what you can try to do is maybe take public transit to or from those places. And if you live there, you can walk around that space. So think about if you have the new Park Hill Golf Course that will now be a park. If we have more and more housing, commercial, residential there, you could walk to the restaurant, you could walk to a dry cleaners, you could walk to the light rail, and you could take the light rail to or from downtown. But right now, it is hard to say that you could if you lived in Lowry, get to Park Hill or get to Cherry Creek or get to downtown all on public transit. And so I think what we're trying to do is focus more development around places that have public transit. That means places like Colfax. Mm-hmm. So we want more housing on Colfax so you can live there and take the BRT to and from there. But I think you're still going to need car transit between those places because people's lives are still complex enough. We don't have enough infrastructure to make those work in all those locations. So we're trying to focus on a handful of places we can really build housing density to match the public transit infrastructure and build up around those, knowing we can't yet replace cars for families who have to go to 4 or 5 different places in the city on a given day.
It's interesting that you have brought up Park Hill in this conversation because that was the whole debate, was to build these housing and mixed use and commercial and make this into one of those nodes, but the loudest voices won out in that case. So I wonder, where are these nodes? I would love to hear you name 1 or 2.
Well, I think that we're clear about Park Hill that there will be no construction of housing or commercial on the footprint of the park. We think there's a great opportunity, and the neighborhood actually agrees that we want affordable housing in the surrounding area of the park. And we don't want to see that neighborhood gentrified where the folks that live there historically are all pushed out. And so that's a place where there's a both and. You can both have a big public park, and you can have housing and commercial activity and grocery stores that come in the surrounding space. We're going to launch a new process with public feedback to figure out what people's priorities are for those locations around the park. I think GES has a great opportunity to be one of those places. We have public transit in GES. Globeville, Swansea, is a great opportunity for that. Obviously, there's a lot of housing density growing up in Central Park along the light rail now spot. That is a location that can offer more of that. And so we think all those places that have access, and then Colfax, we really think can be. Purpose of BRT is now you could live on Colfax, you could get on the BRT each morning, get quickly to work or to downtown and back. So we think each of those are places where we have public transit now, whether it's light rail or BRT, are places where we want to focus on adding density and adding the full lived experience of density, which is not just housing, but also commercial restaurants, dry cleaners, the things you need to live.
I have a friend who lives in Central Park. She always drove to work before, and she just recently started taking the light rail. She says she loves it.
Yeah, that's what we hope. It makes it easier.
Yeah, I'm happy for her. We got to talk about Congress. You're going back to D.C.
Never heard of it.
They have invited you, perhaps compelled you to come and testify into their inquiry into Denver and 3 other so-called sanctuary jurisdictions. It sounds like they might be preparing to cut federal funding if they don't get the answers they want. How are you preparing for this?
We are preparing very thoroughly, I think, to make the case for the policies we have in Denver and why we think they are a common sense approach to this challenge. We think this does not need to be a crisis. It is solvable. We think we've taken the right steps with real incredible support from the community here in Denver, and I'm very proud of where Denver is. I think we've found the balance of we are a welcoming city. We want folks to come here, whether you're coming from Cleveland or California or Caracas, like when they come to Denver, and we help integrate them. Our job is to help them get up on their own so they can get a job and pay their taxes and pay their own rent and make it work. That has been successful for us. And we think it is a false narrative to say that somehow if you're a welcoming city, you're not committed to public safety. Like, we're committed to both. And we've been very focused on both. And crime has gone down in the city at the same time that we've had 42,000 newcomers arrive in the city. And so we think that's a false narrative to say somehow you have to do one or the other. We think it can help the economy. It can support our businesses. It can support our tax base. And if we do it the right way. And so we think there's a both and story, and we'll try to tell that clearly.
This is what you said just sounded very reasonable. And you know you're going to Congress, right? This is not the language they use there. They talk in sound bites in media moments. Lauren Boebert is on this committee.
You're talking to Boebert, and you're looking at two people that went to Boebert's house to have a conversation with her. So.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene also on the committee. All sorts of fun.
I don't know if she wants to hear so much about these benefits and long-term economic strategies and such.
I am going to make the remarkable stance of assuming best intent.
But honestly, good luck.
And that we're going to make the clear case for what we've done and why we think it works. I mean, we think that the data is quite clear that this approach works. And we think actually one of the things we see is the fact that we have engaged people in services, supported them, means we've built trust there, which is why we have not seen huge spikes in crime, because those folks that arrive who are the most at risk of being victims of that crime trust our police department to reach out and say, hey, there's something happening here, or hey, I saw something here. And they know they're not at risk of being deported or arrested because they are a victim or they are a witness. So we think that relationship building has worked not just on economic impact, but on public safety in the city. So we think this is a solvable problem, and we'd love Congress's help in trying to solve it.
I mean, Bree said this. We talked to Boebert. We know what she's like. She's constantly trying to score points and own the libs. Like, are you thinking about that? How you're going to prepare yourself to be in that, moving quickly, trying to capture those moments? Because that's politics now, right? A little bit.
Yeah, I think one thing I've been told as we prep this is not really a fair fight. It's not meant to be an actual Lincoln Douglas debate. This is not where you get equal time to make your case. They ask you a question, and when you start answering the question, they yell over you as you answer the question.
She's going to try to dunk on you.
Yeah, so I understand that. I think for me, the benefit is I think we have the best answers. I think we have the best policy, and we have the best set of practices, and they've worked. And so the parade of horribles they love to paint about the risks are just not true for us. And so we think if people care about facts and care about policy solutions, Denver has a pretty good example of how you can get it done.
Well, she's a Jason Aldean fan, and also she's a dog person. So if you needed
some
personal stuff.
Those are two pieces of prep I did not have.
Yeah. Her mom, I feel like her mom was holding the pit bulls when we came in.
Mm-hmm. She was cooking beef stroganoff.
Yeah.
What credit do I get if I can get a Jason Aldean quote in my testimony?
I mean, I'm just saying, maybe that's how you relate.
That's right. That'll be my CityCast goal for the bingo card.
There's some real disagreements here over this immigration issue, and how Denver and the Denver Metro have handled it. We know you've been going back and forth with Aurora Mayor Mike Kaufman in the press for months now about who was responsible for this whole Tren de Aragua situation. As you prepare to go and speak to Congress, is there anything looking back that you had wished you had done differently?
It's a great question. There is not right now that comes to mind. I mean, what I think about is there were different phases of the challenge. There was the moment in December of 23 where we were getting 11 buses a day, and we had people in T-shirts and sandals in 10-degree weather, and there were kids on the streets. I mean, you remember the calls we were getting at that point of why do I see 3 kids sitting out on Colfax? And we were not going to let that happen. And so at that point, we had to immediately stand up these hotels and had to stand up hotels with whatever folks were showing up. That was the right solution at that right moment. When they started to repeal when temporary protective status ran out and folks didn't have immediate path to work authorization, our only chance to get them work was to enter into having them apply for asylum. That was a longer process, but was the right thing to do. I think our North Star was always every migrant that arrived in the city, they'd say one thing, they'd say, Alcalde, no quiero nada, solo quiero trabajo. They're like, I don't want any help, all I want is a job. And that was our North Star. If we can get you to work, you can support yourself. And I would say conservative CEOs would call me every day and say, Mike, those folks should have to work. And then the immigrants themselves would say, please, Mr. Mayor, can I just work? I was like, all right, we all agree. This is actually a relatively practical problem. Let's get you up so you can support yourselves. And we did that at every turn. So I feel like that was what worked for us. That was why we got people off the streets. That's why we don't have large encampments of migrants anymore. That's why we have 7,000 people who are work authorized and on the job today, paying taxes and supporting their family. And it's why we've been able to cut the amount of money the city will spend on migrants by 90% this year. That's all for us showed that it worked. And we think that's even without any federal immigration reform. If they'd actually got the bipartisan immigration reform done, it could be even easier. So I think there is a path, and it's interesting to look at. I think most practical people come down in roughly the same spot. I think Aurora's approach to how to handle the immigration raids is about the same as Denver's. When it comes to it and you have to run a city, you come back to pretty pragmatic approaches to keeping all your residents safe. And so I think there is a path out of this one. We just have to have people who want to solve the problem rather than just campaign on the problem.
On the broader topic of the new Trump administration, I feel like, we keep hearing from Denverites every day. People are worried about something new. There's a protest about some other new executive order or a new policy. It's hard to know, and we feel this as journalists, it's hard to know what to care about. What's the important thing? How do you do that?
It's hard to scenario plan across 27 different agencies what the possible impact would be and what we will do. And we could spend hundreds of hours doing that, and it turns out not to happen. So what we try to do is focus on the things that are real as they arrive, that we know have a direct impact, and how to respond. So we're prepared to be nimble. In the same way when similarly on immigration, we said we think churches and schools and hospitals should not be targeted. We're happy to see that they have not been yet, and that's been good for us. So I think what we try to do is focus on what our parameters are, and then wait for those proposals to become much more actual before we spend a lot of time advanced planning for them.
What about personally? Well, and not just as a mayor, but as just a guy trying to make it as an American today, as a Denverite.
Yeah, it is hard because the amount of chaos and the amount of lawlessness feels so overwhelming. It's hard to figure out what to be irate about and what to be exhausted about. And you can feel in people the exhaustion of just not wanting to engage anymore. And what I always say that scares me about this is when that happens, what people do is they just narrow their circle of belonging. Instead of thinking of yourself as an American, everything that America does, we own, you sort of become a Coloradan or a Denverite or just your neighborhood or just your friends or just your church, and you let the rest of it go. And I think that's really dangerous for us. And so I want people, that's why I feel like Denver is our real focus of feel like this is your city, believe in it, be proud of it, push us to do better at it, and we will. But don't give up on the notion that you can still work with your neighbor to solve hard problems. So I think that's where we lose the most. So I try to pick the things that we can take direct action on, and then I try to protect myself from being overwhelmed by all of it, because I think that is when it gets hard and people get that sense of learned helplessness of like, you feel like if you jump to either side of the fence, you're going to get shocked, as the old dog experiment was. And so I try to stay focused on the things we can move and affect, and then be relentless about those. I'd be curious what your strategy is.
Oh, flailing? I don't know, drowning? I honestly don't know. Every time I try to talk to people about politics now in my personal life, it's like either they're not angry enough about the things I'm angry about, or I'm not angry enough about the things they're angry about. And then we're fighting about if we're angry enough at each other's things.
And it does take real coordination, because the challenge is when there are 15 things a day, if you don't coordinate around one or two of them, then they've effectively dispersed everyone to not have a coherent response. And they say, see, no one really cares, because in any one thing.
And that's a strategy, absolutely.
That's the strategy.
Yeah.
And so I think we're trying to focus them on and that's part of the reason why we think the conversation is productive, I hope, next week, is they want to make this a divisive, dramatic, catastrophic issue on immigration, and it's not. It doesn't have to be ideological. There's actually quite reasonable people that agree on this, and we think this is a place where you can reframe this and say it's not a function of deporting 10 million people and ripping 10th grade students out of classrooms, or of letting crime run rampant in the cities. No one's arguing for that. There is a clear path to say there's a reasonable solution here that doesn't have to be going to extremes. And we think the more you can engage them on those topics and prove that there are common sense answers, the more people say you don't have to just give in to their narrative being the one.
Well, I will be watching that hearing very closely. I cannot wait to hear how this goes.
I have a final question about that hearing.
Please.
What are you going to wear? Are you going to wear your Wrangler jacket? You're going to go like full Colorado dad? Like, how are you going to represent us? I
think I probably should wear the jacket in, at least. I think I'll have to wear an actual suit in the hearing.
Who knows these days, you know?
Maybe I'll try a hoodie, see if that works. No, my plan is I did take the suit that I have that needs to be cleaned to the dry cleaner, so I will at least have one clean suit ready for that.
Spoken like a true Coloradan. I have one suit. It might be clean.
It might be clean.
Just wear my.
I had to get it rush cleaned a week ago when I thought I was being summoned to go whenever it was the first date, and I was like, oh gosh, I better get a suit clean, because it is not. So at least I'll have one clean suit.
We'll be watching for sure.
We'll talk to you afterwards at some point.
I will look forward to it.
Thanks for coming back on the show, Mayor.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to see
Mayor.
you both.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell Nathan McKinnon about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. And if you love the show, come see us in person at Heyday, an indoor fair with a distinctly Denver twist, on Saturday, March 8th. Get your tickets now at heydaydenver.com. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See ya. Tell Lauren Boebert, Paul and I said, hey, what's up? haven't talked about you in a while.